Hi everyone, Dr. Sandy here again from D Island Docs. Just checking in with more information about COVID 19. I think it's very important for some people in order to be compliant to the restrictions and all of the what we are requiring or what everyone around the world is requiring people to do, stay at home, stay socially distant. You kind of have to understand why it is that you're doing what you're doing in order to be more successful at it. I've had a lot of people ask, why should we remain socially distant? Why should we care about who gets the disease or not? Is it really going to affect our population? What's the big hoopla about the coronavirus? And um, hopefully, by the time I'm done explaining this, that we all have a better understanding of it. We all have more information because I said information is power and power leads to the right decisions. And the more information we have about it, the more we can share this information with our friends, families, and loved ones so that we can all be part of the whole group of people who are going to be helping. Now, COVID 19, we have decided that, well, the CDC, the WHO, um, the ministers of health, the prime ministers, the presidents, government on a whole has decided to mostly do social isolation in majority of the countries, especially in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, I believe it's now in Barbados, and also in the Bahamas. Now, what exactly social isolation and social distancing? We talked about it yesterday, or I believe the day before. It's about keeping about 6 feet apart. We even went over a little bit. If you missed that video, you could always click back on it about the disease and what the disease does. Like, what does it do? What does COVID 19 look like exactly? What makes it so virulent? It survives in the air. It's in the air for about 3 hours. That means that 3 hours later, you can be in a vicinity where somebody had it, and the respiratory droplets may perhaps still be in the atmosphere. That in of itself is enough to keep, well, for me, a heightened alert to be like, stay indoors because you don't want to be exposed to someone else that is sick and their respiratory droplets that they have let out into the atmosphere. Um, we also talked about it surviving on surfaces like wood, steel, plastic for up to 24 hours in some instances. So even the surfaces at your home, it's good enough to wash your hands, but also be sure to clean down your surfaces, your kitchen counters, your doorknobs. I do my fridge door, my microwave door, all the faucets in the house that everybody's going to be touching from the beginning to the end. I would suggest that you do that as well in your house as often as possible because with all of this happening around the world, it being a pandemic, it means that supplies are in high demand right now, and you may not have necessarily gotten all of your supplies or be able to get supplies. So it's all about conservation. It's all about being in this for the long haul. We are as a group are going to get through this together. Now, I watched this video of another doctor, and she kind of really outlined the numbers and gave me inspiration to do it for the Caribbean. Now, we are here in all of, for all the Caribbean countries to basically, help educate them on health and health systems and health care in general. So in this time, I'm gonna start first with Trinidad, where I'm from. Um, and their population right now is about 1.3 million. I have a little board here, and I'm gonna just put the top, and I'm gonna put the country. And my handwriting is not the best, but hopefully, if you watch this, then you can kind of get an idea of what is going on and why everybody is on heightened alert. Now, I talked a little bit before about, if you're watching what's going on in Italy, you kind of see like if the healthcare system gets overwhelmed, what can happen. And similarly, right now in New York City, they're seeing an increased number of cases, an increased number of demand for beds, an increased number of demands for healthcare workers, an increased number of demands for equipment, an increase even gloves, masks, suits, even healthcare workers to take care of reasonably well people who don't necessarily have COVID-19. You know, there's still people with medical conditions that still need care on a day-to-day basis. We still need healthcare workers for that. In Trinidad, we have, from the research I did online, somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. I'm always able to be corrected. It's about a 3 in 1,000 ratio of physicians to the general population. And that means for every 1,000 people in Trinidad, there are about three physicians. I did not do for the nursing staff and all the auxiliary staff in the hospital, but that's just the one that I found on the internet. So with Trinidad having a population of 1.3 million right now, we are estimating that about 40 to, if we do nothing, if people don't do social isolation, which is what we've been seeing, about 40 to 70% of the population will in fact get the coronavirus. And I'm touching my face way too much for this video, but okay. So 40 to 70% of the population would get it. I'm just going to guesstimate 1.3 million, about half of that is 500,000. So we are looking in the middle ground at about 500,000 people getting the disease if we don't socially isolate. This is why they're saying socially isolate. Of that 50%, they're saying that about 20% of that will require hospitalization. So 500,000 people are going to get it. 80% of them are going to get better. They're going to be well. But 20% of that 500,000 that get the disease will in fact require some form of hospitalization. What's 20% of 500,000? You know, my math, I don't know if it's too good. One fifth. Is that right? Seems like 1/5 of 500,000, which works out to being about, I'm just going to put an H. H means hospitalization. Okay? And then they're saying about 20% of them, I'm just going to put this in front of you right now, about 20% of them, which will equal out to be about 100,000 people, will require hospitalization. That seems like an insanely high number, right? 1.3 million, half of us, if we do nothing, half of us will get it, and of that half, 20% of us will require hospitalization, which equals back to being about 100,000 people. Okay? Now that seems like a really high number. Of that 20%, that should already be alarming to you, because that's already alarming to me. Of that 20%, they're saying that 5% of those patients eventually require ventilation, or the need for ventilation assistance. So what's 5% of 100,000? I'm just going to put a V for ventilation, and 5% of 100,000, which is like 1/20th. I kind of did some of the math on my paper here before we got started, just so that we could see, which is about 5,000 people. You can see that. So H is for hospitalizations, which is about 100,000, and V is for ventilation, which is about 5,000. Now, 5,000 people require ventilation in Trinidad seems like an absurd amount of people to require ventilation for a disease process. How many ventilators do we have in Trinidad? I couldn't find it anywhere on the internet. I'm not sure exactly how many numbers. So I arbitrarily came up with a number in my head. I kind of said, okay, so if we have 100 ventilators, you know, like all throughout all of our hospital systems, private hospitals give up their ventilators, everybody gives up their ventilators, and we end up with, like, on a good side, 1,000, well, not even 1,000, I don't think, but if we end up with 100 to 500 ventilators, that still leaves a 1 in 8, 1 in 10 ratio if we have 100 ventilators. What does that mean, 1 in 10 ratio? It means that for every 10 people that show up at the hospital and require ventilation, that we will only have a ventilator for one person. I want that to really sink in with you, because every 10 people that walk through the door and are requiring ventilation to stay alive, we will only be able to help one person. But we can do something about it. We can flatten the curve. And why? What are they talking about with this flattening of the curve? It is to say that every healthcare system has a number of people that they can treat in a given time frame, or have a number of equipment for a certain amount of people. And hey, that kind of like is a straight parallel line on a let me just see if I can try to draw it. I'm trying to figure out how I can give you a visual of this. Okay, I'll make a next video with a visual of what I'm talking about right now. But there's only a certain number of people we can treat, a certain number of masks we have, a certain amount of gloves, a certain amount of tests, a certain amount of medication. I mean, how many of us have been to the hospital, gone to the hospital for medication, and they're like, come back another time, or we don't have the medication right now. So you it's a limited supply, and it would have been, the entire world is fighting for supplies right now. So 1 in every 10 people, that's a number to stay home with you. 1 in every 10 people. Then doctors are going to have really tough decisions to make. You know what I'm saying? We're going to have to be like, who's that one person that you're going to fight to keep on a ventilator? And the other 9, maybe you have a pre-existing condition. Maybe, even if you go on ventilator, it's a less likely chance of you surviving, blah, 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 blah. Nobody wants to even hypothetical what that will look like in the Caribbean. But that's why we're asking people to stay home. That's why we're asking you not to go to the beach. That's why we're asking you not to congregate by your friends. This is not an opportunity for you to gather in groups of more than 20. This is not an opportunity for you to not be socially aware. So that was just Trinidad's numbers, which is 1.3 million as a population. 50% of us are going to get, if we do nothing, get the disease. 500,000. Of that, 100,000 will need hospitalizations, and of that, ventilators would be about 5,000. And if we have 100 ventilators in our country, this is all hypothetical, then it's a 1 in 10 chance. I'm just going to put up those numbers again for those people who like numbers, like myself. I'm using my daughter's little thing to help demonstrate it, so hopefully we can understand what's going on. All right, so that's Trinidad. Now I kind of like extrapolated and did it for all of the Caribbean countries. So I'm just going to call out the numbers, and I'm also going to put this and make it available on the website so that you can take a look at the numbers for your individual countries. So the biggest are Trinidad, and then Jamaica with 2.8 million. 2.8 million infected would mean about 50% of that, which is about 1.5 million, 1.4 million people. That seems like a horrendous number of people to, in fact, get the flu. And of that, 20% will then require some form of hospitalization or assistance, which works out to be about 300,000 Jamaicans needing to visit the hospital for some reason or the other. And of that 300,000, about 15,000 people will in fact become quite ill and require ventilation. I'm not sure I can find any data online to tell me exactly how many ventilators each country has for a breakdown number of what we're looking at from a healthcare perspective, from a government perspective, why people need to socially isolate. For Grenada, which is a much smaller Caribbean country, 104,000 as their population. Infected is about half of that, which is like about 50,000 people. And that's looking at about 10,000 of them being infected to need hospitalization. Of that, that's going to be about 500 of them requiring ventilation. Even in countries like Haiti and the Dominican Republic, they're about 10 million each, which would require, if we do nothing, as I keep saying, if we don't do social isolation, about 40 to 70% of the population will get it. And that's the numbers that I'm breaking down and working with. And that, I hope, is motivating you to tell your family and friends, hey, listen here. We live in Jamaica. If we keep going out, we keep hanging out, we keep congregating, 15,000 of our people are going to be in a life or death situation, and we may not have enough equipment or medication to keep them all alive. Similarly, Trinidad, about 5,000 people will need not be ill, but need ventilation because it would be 100,000 people that are ill, which is an overwhelming amount of people. This is a pandemic, people. This is happening all around the world. We're seeing it rising in numbers exponentially every 2 to 3 days. In some cases, even more than that because of cases that have come in to the country. So we have to do this together. I keep stressing the fact this is not a governmental issue. This is not a medical only. This is a you and me. This is everybody. We need to work together. With knowing what you know about the COVID-19 as a virus itself, and now kind of hearing the numbers that will be needed to be treated if we continue going to the parks and going to the beaches and hanging out, it's going to be overwhelming. It is going to come down to some dire decisions. It's going to be a disaster. But we don't want it to be, and that's why we're saying, flatten the curve. Flatten the curve by staying indoors. Flatten the curve. And what flattening the curve does, I'll just show you the curve right here. What flattening that curve does, that highlighted section at the top, is reduce those amount of people that will be sick or need assistance, and hopefully keep us ahead of this disease. We're in this together. We're in this for the long haul. If you have any questions, feel free to message, email, hit up a question on our Instagram, which is D Island Docs, or our Facebook page. You just put in D Island Docs, DE Island Doc, and it should pop up. We can do this if we are socially conscious and we do the right thing right away from the beginning. We can get ahead of this. For those of our family and friends that are in the U.S., our Caribbean population, especially in New York City, we're seeing the numbers rising. I believe it's about 20,000 now in New York State, with most of the cases being in New York City, and New York City being the epicenter in the U.S. for the coronavirus. Tell your family members, obey the stay at home, wash your hands even if you're at home. If you have any supplies that you would like to drop off to your local doctor, you should do it. The more gloves, the more masks, the more things, the more protective gear, they're going to need it. And all the healthcare workers that are banding together in whatever way, form possible, I'm trying to do my part by helping out the population and making these little videos at home just so that people kind of understand what is going on. Because, when I watch the news, I'm like slightly overwhelmed by the information that I'm getting. And, with the people making the decisions that they're making to still go to river lines and beach lines and hangouts and all these different things. Sometimes it's that they just really don't understand. But hopefully after this video, you kind of have an idea of how many people will be needing treatment. I'm just going to call the country and my guesstimate of how many people will need hospitalization. And then 5% of that number that I call will then, the second number that I call with the country will then be people that may need ventilation. So the Bahamas, 30,000 people are going to be needing hospitalization if we do nothing. And of that, 5%, 1,000 people will need ventilation. Now, if my math is wrong, listen, I'm not a math major, but you know what I mean. The Dominican Republic, Haiti, 10 million, that's a huge population. About 20% of that, which is 1 million, will in fact need to be hospitalized if we do nothing. Guyana, 72,000 needing hospitalization. 3,000 of them needing ventilation. Barbados, 30,000 needing hospitalization. 1,500 of them needing ventilation. And we already in Trinidad, 100,000 needing hospitalization and 5,000 of them requiring ventilation. St. Vincent, 10,000 and then 500 requiring ventilation. These numbers are real if we do nothing. These numbers are predictive of what can happen, and we can kind of see it in Italy right now. What's going on? It's not an exaggeration. So I'm just urging everyone, do what's right. It may be a little difficult, but do what's right and stay at home. Do what's right and stay at home and stay socially distant. This is Dr. Sandy for The Island Docs checking out for today. I'll be back tomorrow with some more information. Bye, guys.